There's one characteristic of North American warfare that sticks out from other times and places. What's with all the scalping? This video will take a look at what scalping is and answer some of the most common questions about it. Let's get started. So what exactly is scalping? Well, simply put, scalping is the removal of hair and skin from the top of someone's head. This could be done in a few different ways. One method involved grabbing the scalped person's hair until it tented or pulled away from their head, then slicing through that tented skin. This left you with a large coin-sized bit of skin along with the person's hair. There are plenty of historical accounts of people being scalped several times, so this technique probably explains how that could happen. But the most common technique was by making a series of cuts around a person's hairline down to the back of their neck, putting your foot on the person's back or shoulder, then yanking their hair and scalp off their head. One person reported the process made a sort of floppy sound, while another, who was at least semi-conscious while his head skin was being ripped off, said it reminded him of loud thunder. Oh, you didn't know you could survive scalping? Generally only dead people were scalped, but sometimes mistakes were made and people who had only lost consciousness would wake up missing the top of their head. The scalping process isn't really that lethal. What kills you is probably whatever happened to you that led up to your scalping. Nevertheless, there were methods of treating scalp wounds, and people often survived. There's some controversy over how scalping originated in North America. A theory that has gained traction in recent decades is the idea that European explorers and settlers brought the practice with them when they settled in North America. The theory is that settlers taught scalping to the peaceful natives who knew nothing of the practice.
So what the hell do you expect the Indians to do? Sit back on their butts while the army takes over their land?
You saw for yourself what they did, taking off scalps.
Yeah, and who taught them that little trick? The white man.
Oh, and cutting.
The thing is, this theory is wrong. Like 100% wrong. Totally wrong. Demonstrably wrong. It seems more likely that when it comes to scalping, what we have here is a case of independent invention. It's undeniable that the Scythians, who lived around 2,500 years ago near present-day Iran, are recorded as having collected scalps from their defeated foes. And there are isolated cases of scalping in medieval literature, as well as archaeological evidence from the Dark Ages. But by the time of the Age of Exploration in the mid-16th century, Europeans had all but forgotten the concept of scalping. The first European explorers who met the natives all described observing scalps, from Jacques Cartier in Quebec to Hernando de Soto in Florida. The explorers didn't have a common term they could tell the folks back home that conveyed what they were seeing. If they had, they probably would have used it. You know that thing we do to people's heads when we kill them? Well, here they do that too. It wasn't until the 1670s, during King Philip's War, that English settlers began to use the word scalp as a verb, meaning to remove someone's hair and skin from the crown of their head. In contrast, the native tribes had plenty of different words for scalping. The process, the type of scalp collected, different names for scalps from different tribes. But what really proves the scope of scalping before Europeans got to America is the archaeological record. There are dozens of archaeological sites stretching from the eastern seaboard to Arizona, containing the skeletons of indigenous people. Many of their skulls show the telltale cuts of being scalped. The largest is the Crow Creek site in central South Dakota, where almost 500 individual skeletons were dumped together in a mass grave about 150 years before Christopher Columbus ever reached the New World. Over 90% of these people's skulls show evidence of being scalped. Now, don't take this as meaning the Europeans were more peaceful or prudish than the Indians. These are the same people who routinely burned people at the stake or disemboweled them before cutting them into quarters. Here's the deal. The easiest way to prove someone's dead is taking a vital and identifiable body part, like a head. The average human head weighs about 10 to 12 pounds. Europeans had access to things like roads and horses, so for them it was easier to transport a person's whole head as proof they were dead. In contrast, North America was a rugged, untamed place. Instead of carrying around something the size and weight of a bowling ball, it was just as good and a whole lot more convenient to take the skin off the head. Well, who got scalped? Well, in a word, everyone. Men had a slightly higher chance of being scalped. They were the ones expected to go on raiding parties and such. But according to skulls found in archaeological digs, women, old people, and even children as young as 5 years old were routinely killed and scalped. Women, children, and the elderly usually stayed close to villages, which made them a tough target. Now think about it this way. If you're a warrior trying to prove how awesome you are, What's more awesome than sneaking into an enemy village in the heart of enemy territory, killing and scalping one of the occupants, and making it out alive? Well, first it's important to recognize that scalping's popularity varied among different tribes, different locations, and different time periods. For example, there's not a lot of evidence for scalping in the Pacific Northwest area. But for the people that did practice scalping, there were many reasons for it. The most apparent is as a war souvenir. Remember, for a scalp to be worth anything, you yourself had to collect it, and only from a dead victim, or at least someone who you reasonably thought was dead. Every society has some type of war trophy it values among its warriors. Japanese samurai collected the heads of their enemies, which were cleaned up and viewed during special ceremonies. In the Old Testament, the Israelites collected their enemies' foreskins. Okay, that can't be right. Huh, that is right. Well then. I'm just saying, if you make me choose between my scalp and foreskin, I'm gonna give you my scalp. Even today, modern militaries mark their warriors' achievements with ribbons and decorations. For the North American natives, a scalp was tangible proof of a warrior's success. Scalps could be used to decorate war clothing or posted in front of lodges. After a successful war party, a village would hold a scalp dance, where the collected scalps would be displayed on poles. If you'd collected one of these scalps, you got some major street cred. There is also a spiritual component to scalp taking. Many tribesmen, especially in the eastern part of the continent, plucked or shaved their heads, except for a longer plume of hair referred to as a scalp lock. There were lots of reasons behind this scalp lock. It helped identify your tribe, and it was also a way to flex on your enemies. You know, come and take it. But the Indians also gave special significance to this scalp lock. Controlling it was like controlling the person's soul. Among the Arikaras, who live in present-day North Dakota, a man who survived being scalped had lost a part of what made him human. He was often treated as a social pariah and forced to live on his own. The Arikara and Pawnee tribes tell several legends about solitary, scalped men who acted sort of like guardian angels. They often helped young men who were lost on hunting trips or who took care of women whose villages had been raided. Scalps could be used as a way of desecrating the enemy, as well as serve as a healing process for a village that had been raided. Revenge could be satisfied by taking scalps from the offending tribe. Once collected, these scalps were often given to tribe members who had lost loved ones. They could then burn the scalps or feed them to the dogs. Scalps are also an easy way of counting war dead, which brings us to the Europeans. Europeans didn't invent scalping in North America, but they definitely commercialized it. During conflicts with their Indian neighbors, European leaders began paying for enemy heads, which then morphed into paying for scalps. Initially, leaders paid for scalps with beaver pelts, wampum, or cloth, but the scalp trade went into earnest when money started being offered. By the early 18th century, a male Indian scalp could be worth up to 100 pounds. The colonies would continue to use this practice to eliminate competing native tribes. The colonists in North America viewed scalp taking with conflicting attitudes bordering on hypocrisy. During the American Revolution, both sides would use the practice of scalp taking to demonize the other side. In July 1777, in upstate New York, Jane McCrae, who was engaged to a British officer, was killed and scalped by Indian warriors who were allied with the British. The Continental Press had a field day with the propaganda, which portrayed the British as using their native allies to brutalize the colonists. But of course, the colonists wouldn't shy away from scalping when it suited their own purposes. For example, in August 1775, right when the war was kicking off, Thomas Brown, a British loyalist from South Carolina, was accosted by patriots and taken to Georgia. He later wrote about his ordeal: being overpowered, stabbed in many places, my skull fractured by a blow from a rifle, I was dragged in a state of insensibility to Augusta. My hair was then chiefly torn up by the roots, what remained stripped off by knives, my head scalped in 3 or 4 different places, my legs tarred and burnt by lighted torches, from which I lost the use of 2 of my toes and rendered incapable of setting my feet to the ground for 6 months. This idea of using scalping to both terrorize your enemies while also demonizing their own scalp taking would persist throughout the 19th century until the practice died out. Scalping, or at least the threat of it, would cast a long shadow on the American frontier. Now, for all the publicity it gets, for most Indian tribes, taking a scalp wasn't even the most awesome thing you could do. If you really wanted to wow your people, there was one ultimate power move you could pull, which I'll talk about in this other video. If you learned anything or enjoyed this video, please give it a like and feel free to drop a comment in the comment section. You can also subscribe to this channel for similar content, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.